what it does. We're going to turn it on. All right. So here in the sources, if you check out the async checkbox in the call stack, this turns on something wonderful and magical. Now, when we try and delete this message, the stack trace that gets generated is so much better. So again, it had this anonymous function. Somebody did something anonymously on line 30 and it didn't work. That thing that they did anonymously was passed into set timeout. Set timeout was called on statement view line 30 by onDelete, which was called by some jQuery event dispatching. That is really cool. So JavaScript is asynchronous. A lot of the things we do are responding to user clicks, responding to AJAX events, responding to redraws, responding to stuff happening. And so every time we're waiting, every time there's this asynchronousness, execution stops. And all of our cool stack traces of what's calling what stop. Because execution stops, and we're just waiting for the browser to do something. But when we're trying to debug it, understanding what started that anonymous function is really, really interesting. And so the fact that the Google launched this is really, really cool. All right, so now let's actually dig in and see what's going on. All right, so here is onDelete. And as we saw from the asynchronous stack trace, we see that onDelete is getting called from a jQuery event handler. So we're responding to the click of that button somehow, and it's landing here in this function. And then for some reason, I thought that I needed to do a timeout and defer this to the next execution cycle, because I'm sure there was a good reason for some browser to do that. And so I call, hey, when we're deleting on the next cycle, I want you to destroy this model. Everybody, does somebody know what I did wrong here already?
This is not the this you were looking for?
This was not the this I was looking for. All right, so this, it's so hard to talk about this. All right, try and stay with me here. This that I was looking for when this function executed was not the same this that this is. Right? So out here, when I'm executing onDelete, this is this object, it's statement view, it's whatever, this structure that I'm in. But then I pass a function into set timeout. And I say, hey, later, go ahead and do this thing for me. And when later comes, the browser says, okay, I'm going to execute this thing. But it doesn't know what this is anymore. Just because this code happens to reside in this file doesn't mean that's how it's executed. And so the browser comes back and says, great, I'm going to call this stuff. This.model.model, it doesn't exist. There's no such thing. This ends up being window, or it ends up being jQuery, or it ends up being event, or it ends up being something that you don't expect it to be. So whenever you see this inside of a function that you're passing out, you're passing somewhere else, that is a really good chance that you have either an error that's going to blow up in your face in the next few seconds, or an error that's going to blow up in your face in a few weeks when you're not expecting it. So let's see if there's some ways we can fix this. All right, so this is in statement view.js. So let's open that up. Here we go. So there's a couple of different ways we can fix this problem. Probably the oldest, the tried and true way, the way that's been around in JavaScript forever, is to do one of these little jobbies of saying var that equals this, right? That. Or var self equals this, depending on which book was the first book you read in JavaScript. And then you could reference it inside because you've captured the closure, and now you can pass that value in on the closure. Probably something that would be a little bit more focused, a little bit more maintainable would be to do something like var model equals this dot model, and do something like now you have the model in your closure, and you could execute that. So those are both cool ways to do it. If you want to be really cool, like new JavaScript cool, you can use bind. Bind lets you set the value of this on a function when it gets called later. So you could say bind the function that I'm passing in here so that the value this when it gets called will be the same that this is out here when I'm referencing this. Do you follow all that? No, so that doesn't work in old browsers. So if you're unfortunate enough to have to support IE8, like I am most of the time, you won't be able to use that syntax, but you'll be able to use the _/low- / utility library of your choice syntax of saying _.bind, the function you want to bind, this. Now what we're doing is we're creating a wrapping around that particular function so that we can control what the value of this is, what the context of that object is when it executes. Now, we can delete messages to our heart's content, and they stay gone. Context errors. Now, context errors are not strictly production time things. This is a development error. However, JavaScript is really complex, and callbacks and passing the value of this around is incredibly popular, and you'll run into lots and lots of libraries that use that syntax, lots and lots of base JavaScript functions that use that. And so it's almost inevitable of any JavaScript application of reasonable size that you'll have this problem somewhere along the line. And although you can usually discover this problem through very thorough testing, JavaScript is complicated enough that these sort of errors are going to make it through into production. And so understanding when these kind of things blow up and what were the user steps that they took to find their way into bad states is really important. All right, let's get another one. Jane Doe, a.textstring or .text.substring is not a function. Now this was a relatively isolated error. We don't really have a whole lot of problems. Now, it did happen like 2,000 times in a week. It happened to one person. One poor person just had a really, really bad time. And it happened to them like right away. So I'm logging my user IDs along with error records. So we can go ahead and break this apart and see like what was this user doing to cause all of these problems. So we're going to go in here and we're going to load up this user's account. All right. So this user, this is what they see when they load up Soliloquy, which is not so good. They don't see a timeline. They see my ads. Making money. They see my ads, but they don't see anything, and they're throwing these errors. This a.textstring.substring, a.text.substring is not a function. And so it's not so cool. Let's see if we can figure out what exactly is going on here. So if we break this down, we have a really cool stack trace. Lots of things going on. Because of source maps, I can see that this was coming from statement model JS line 21, and I can see all kinds of cool stuff in the stack trace because I've turned on async. So let's kind of go through this and see if we can understand what's going on. So we have some anonymous function of some kind in my code on statement model. That was passed into something in underscore. So this is probably my code, this statement model stuff. I got called from something in Backbone.js, which got called from jQuery, blah, 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 stuff I don't care about. That got called from XML HTTP request, which is the thing that underlies AJAX requests. So, all right, there's a good sign. Like I'm dealing with some sort of AJAX response is causing this error. That AJAX response was started by jQuery, blah, 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 Backbone, blah, 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 all the way up to DOM content loaded. So this is something at the very beginning. We finish loading our page, we fire some AJAX, that AJAX comes back, and our stuff blows up. Let's see if we can figure out why. if we go ahead and look at statement model, here's the code in question. It's this parse function. Parse response kind of makes sense. We're dealing with like an AJAX response body. We're getting some sort of data back from the server, and we want to do some stuff to it. But there's a bunch of like expectations in this code. So parse gets a response, and it's passing it into underscore map or low-dash map, whatever your preference is. So it's expecting response is something we can iterate over. And everything that we're iterating over, it has some more expectations about it. So it expects each thing inside a response to be an item with a property on it called text. And it expects text to be a string so that it can call substring on it. So that's a lot of expectations about the data that we got back from here. And so obviously that isn't meeting. So let's take a look at the network and see if we can figure out what's going on. So this is an XHR request. So if we look at my statement here, here is a data payload coming back from the server. And I've formatted this, but like this is just a preview instead of the raw. So we have an array of objects. So we meet the requirements of mapping this thing. And each of those objects have a property called text inside of them. So we're good there. But the value of text is not a string. It's a number. So somehow a number is being returned from our server here. And so when we try and call .substring on a number, it says there's no such thing as substring of a number. I don't know what to do here. I'm going to die. And so that's obviously what's blowing up here. Now, there's lots of reasons why this might have happened. Maybe I'm at fault. Maybe I let like number input in. Like maybe I didn't validate my input and I let somebody like post a number to my server and I just stored it in Mongo or whatever, you know, non-constraining data source I wanted to use, and it just did its thing. Or maybe the server team that I have to work with all the time changed the contract on me and didn't tell me. Not saying it's one or the other, but something happened and this contract changed in production and now I'm ticked. So we have some expectations about this thing that maybe we shouldn't be so strict about. So here's my parse function. Let's see if we can be a little bit more diplomatic about how we're dealing with this response. Because right now we have some very rigid expectations. Well, so response underscore map is pretty tolerant. It should handle me like passing in null or undefined or that sort of stuff to it and just not do anything. But here where I'm referencing text, that's where we're blowing up. So I need to be maybe a little bit more clever about how I'm checking that. So maybe what I should do is I should check the type before I start messing with it. And say, hey, if item.text is a thing, and that thing is a string, then we'll do this. But if it's not, maybe item.text, maybe what we should say is else if item.text and item.text toString, because a lot of things have toString on them, right? Is function. Then we'll say, all right, item.text is item.text.toString.substring 0, 140. Else item.text is bad data. And in either of these cases, what we should do is we definitely got some input that we didn't expect. And so we should log that somewhere. We should send that back to our server so that we know that, hey, we're processing bad data. We need to follow up with this. So I'm just going to print some console.warn, got bad data, item.text. And I should probably put it before I overwrite the original value. So now if we reload this page, the user sees something way better. They actually see the data that was in the system. Now maybe they don't know what 42 means. This is kind of having the assumption that, hey, they put the number 42 in there and that's not some weird derivative of their data that they really sent us. But I'm showing them a bunch of stuff and I get to show more ads, so I'm happy. And then I recorded a bunch of error information about like, hey, we got this bad data 42. We should go look at it, go talk to the server people, go figure out if we took this bad data input, whatever could have caused this. So a data contract error. The contract of what we expected from the server changed out from under us. And so this can cause production faults. If done maliciously, it could cause cross-site scripting problems. It could cause security problems. This can be associated if you have separate teams dealing with your API services and your front-end services, or if you're just interacting with third parties for your data. This can be really difficult to test for because you're really dealing with the entire stack to make sure that the contract
Apologize for the
and the
interruption.
whole company of hackers couldn't have figured, like, nobody's hacked the panel and figured this out.
We're back. We
All
do our
right,
best
but you
at it.
totally ruined my flow. I don't even know where I was anymore. All right, so this is really difficult to test for every possible way this can go wrong. And so you need to weigh the likelihood and the impact of this for your app. If somebody changes the data contract, how volatile is it going to be for you? What is the risk to your end customers and to your reputation when this changes? And spend the appropriate amount testing and guaranteeing your contracts as necessary. All right, this mean guy. Inline ads is not a function. Major impact to our site. Now, this didn't happen a lot. Out of, a couple thousand hits a week, it's only happened maybe 100 times. But it happened to more than one user. This isn't just one dude with really bad data. This is a bunch of people had some similar problem. This is something wrong with some small segment of my environment. And the other thing I know is that this is happening right away. This is like something to do with initialization. It just blows up as we start. So the problem is a.inline_ads is not a function. So if we open up the app and run this thing, let's go back to the normal customer. So we run this thing, and we're not seeing that error. That doesn't happen for me. Works on my machine. Bug closed. No, like this is a thing. Something is going wrong. So how could inline ads not be a function? So let's just search our code. Where are we using inline ads? Right here. Here's where it gets defined by my third-party script, and here's where I use it in Soliloquy.js, my main file. Here I'm calling window.inlineAds, and I'm setting up my advertising provider key. So this is my contract with my advertising providers. They say, hey, go ahead, just drop our script on your page, and when you're good to go, you call this, you give us your key, you tell us how many ads you want, and we'll put them on your page. No problem. So I did that. I have this function called setup_ads, which I call as part of jQuery ready. I'm just going ahead and doing my stuff. Somehow, window.inlineAds is not a function. But it's not for me. Like when I run it right now, everything is just fine. So what would people see if window.inlineAds was not a function? Well, we could simulate that. Well, that's not so good. If the 100 people a week who run into the problem, inline ads is not a function, this is the experience of Soliloquy they have. No statements, no ads, No money, nothing, just dead. The app just doesn't do anything for them. So how could that happen? Like obviously I'm not going in here and changing the code and setting it to undefined. Inline ads is being defined by this third-party script here, this inline ad provider, which I just load, just like all of my other scripts, here in my index.html file. But it's coming from a different domain, and it's one of the last scripts on my page. So one of the things that I've discovered sifting through thousands of different sites on Trek.js was that this is an incredibly common problem that I didn't even know existed. Sometimes one script on your page won't load. Just one. Just one. You could have a whole JavaScript app. And what if stripe.js doesn't load on your page? Because the customer or the user was on a phone and they were on a train and they hit a blip in a signal, they jumped towers just as your browser was requesting that and the DNS query failed. And then you can end up in this state where all of your app loaded just like you expected it to, except one of your libraries isn't there. A catastrophic case, like right here, is that just nothing works, which is not a great user experience, but they can still do it. But this can cause far more insidious problems. And I want to tell you a story about my own product. So I use Stripe in Trek.js for people checking out on the forum. And if anybody has ever used Stripe for a transaction, one of their integration patterns is that you just have a regular credit card form where you take a credit card number and expiration date and CCV number and all the other stuff. And you then decorate that form with Stripe's attributes. And with their thing on the page, they'll intercept that request, deliver it to their own servers, and give you a token with it. And everything is great, no problems, we're good to go. Except that their file, their JavaScript file just, say, doesn't load on one particular user's, say, one particular user in Australia across Pacific internet connection, just doesn't load. Then you just have a form on your page that contains all the credit card number that gets posted to your server just like everything else, violating all kinds of PCI and causing all kinds of concern when that customer who is very security conscious sees that this data is just being posted to your server when you said that you weren't going to do that. That happens in the real world. And so we need to be conscious when we're using things that are loaded from particular scripts that might not be loaded as part of our primary application. At a certain small percentage of the time, somewhere between 0.5% to 1% of the time, depending on how big of your clientele is mobile, they will simply fail to load. So how you can fight against that is simply by checking things that are loaded externally before you use them. So in this case, I know that I'm having a problem with window.inlineAds, sometimes not working. So before I do anything, I'm just going to say, hey, if window.inlineAds is a thing, then we'll do this. If it's not, I'm going to say console.warn inline ads failed again. Sad. And so now if I just simulate it failing by taking another script. Now, what would happen in this circumstance where inline ads is failing to load? The user still sees the majority of the content. They still see their list of statements. They still see my sidebar ad provider. They just don't see my inline ads, which I wish they had. I wish I'd gotten that impression money. However, I'd much rather them have this experience. So, third part or loading errors. Again, this is way more common than I ever thought it was possible. This can happen all kinds of times when you have poor connectivity, poor DNS, third-party domains, crappy SSL certificates. All kinds of problems can cause single scripts on other domains to fail from loading. And so think about the apps that you're building. Think about all of the different scripts that you're bringing in, and make sure that the scripts that you're bringing in, you validate that they are there before using them. And if it is security conscious, like Stripe, or another security or financial transaction, make sure that you know whether it's there or not before you just start doing stuff. All right, last error of the day. Jane Doe. We got some reports that authors, people, that was one of our big audiences for Soliloquy, was that people who are writing books tended to just spew their thoughts throughout the course of the day just into Soliloquy. And they were complaining to us that they would have slowing performances. Over the course of the day, it would just get slower and slower and slower. And then eventually the browser would just crash underneath of them. And would just be catastrophic failure. They would just, everything was gone. They'd lose all their tabs and they were just hissed. Unfortunately, there's no good way for us to automatically crash the browser crashing, or automatically track the browser crashing, because you can't error report off of a platform when it's the platform that's just blowing up. And so we have to rely on people complaining on Twitter that Soliloquy is broken. And as a competitor to Soliloquy, I don't really want people going to Twitter to complain about Soliloquy. It's kind of counterintuitive to what we want. But so we heard about a bunch of people saying that it gets slower and slower and then eventually crashes. So let's see if we can figure out what's going on. So slower and slower sounds like a memory leak. And so there's lots of different ways you can go about troubleshooting memory leaks in an application. But my favorite way, I used to play video games a lot, too much. And so my favorite way is kind of like a video game. And it's this timeline tab here in Chrome. And so I'm going to play this here a little bit. So if we go to the timeline tab, there's not a lot of data until we kick this thing off. So let me refresh the page. I don't want it to start right now. So what the timeline tab does is it's listening for all kinds of interesting things that are happening as the page is working. So it listens for, what is the JavaScript stack? What's the memory utilization? What are the paint events happening as you go, and it charts it over the course of a timeline. And it's really interesting to do and play with and see how an app works. So what I want to do is I'm going to run a little test here. So I'm going to refresh Soliloquy, and I'm going to write a few statements, and then I'm going to delete those statements. Essentially, I'm trying to do a few actions in Soliloquy, and then put it back into its original state, which I would expect memory to basically come back to a normal flat line if everything is working as expected. So I'm going to refresh this. I don't want this to go yet. And I'm going to say, hey, number 1. Hey, number 2. Or no, sorry, I did it wrong. Erase. Start. Hey again, number 1. Hey again, number 2. Hey again, number 3. And then we're just going to delete those right back out. I think I did an empty one too. And now we're going to take a look at what we got. So there's a lot of data here. There's a lot of different things going on. And it can be kind of hard to figure out where to start. Here, the line graph here at the bottom. I think I did it wrong. That's close enough. Here, this memory on the bottom shows you the high level what's going on. And so over the course of the time I was running this test, I could see a bunch of different things happening. I can see in blue the JS heap size ticks up and up and up, and then there's some clear event, and then it ticks up, clear, up, 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 up. So it's definitely not falling back to where it was. There's definitely something happening here. There's also something going on here with nodes ticking up and up, but it's hard to understand exactly what's happening to compare. And so what we can do here is, here's where the video game part comes in. And so if you ever played old school first-person shooters, you can just use those standard controls of WASD on your keyboard here and just start flying in to this set of events happening here, corresponding right along the timeline. And as you dig in closer and closer and closer to these memory stacks, you can start seeing what's actually going on. And so here we had an event click that called jQuery that did something, something in Soliloquy probably, cdn.soliloquy.com.js that resulted in some sort of parsing HTML. So this looked like probably me adding one of the statements to our timeline here. So I can zoom back out and keep navigating around and check a look at what's happening. Oh, here's a whole bunch of things that happened in a row. So we zoom in, and the closer we get here, we see that it's not one thing that happened in this step. It was a whole bunch of things that happened kind of rapidly. So if we zoom in here, we see a timer firing. Timer firing and results of sidebar ad provider. And that timer fired 6, 7, 8 times. And each time it was calling something to do with fetching an ad. And every time this fired, we see the total amount of used JS memory, total amount of nodes in the DOM, and total amount of listeners just ticking up every time it goes off. So I would say this is a pretty good case that this is our memory leak. So we can just zoom into it right from here, right to the code and see what's going on. Here's our sidebar ad provider. Sidebar ad on an interval that you probably noticed just watching it is refreshing the ads here on the side. And every so often it's putting a different picture of David Hasselhoff or bacon or bears into the page. And so here's that interval happening where it reaches into that advertising container and it clears it out. It sets the HTML to empty. And then it goes and gets a new ad and places that ad in the container. Right below, we can see the place ad function. That's where we're going off, and we're going to the advertising content server, and we're saying, hey, go get me the next ad I need to display. And it gets it from that URL, and then when it gets it, it takes the text, and it sticks it into the element. It sticks it into the advertising container, and then it attaches a click handler to it. Because the advertising provider would, of course, need to know when you click on the ad so that they can, to pay you, right? And so it just keeps going, and it fetches more ads and attaches more clicks. And then it fetches some more ads, and then it attaches some more clicks. And then it fetches some more ads and attaches some more clicks. And at no point is it ever detaching those clicks. It's just replacing them and letting them roam free into the ether of the DOM. And so what's happening is every time this interval goes off and this ad container is cleared, all of the elements are removed from the DOM, but they're just detached DOM elements, just floating in the memory space of this browser. So another way to think about that is if you were an author or you used Soliloquy for hours at a time and watched thousands of cycles of these ads shift, there could be literally millions of pictures of David Hasselhoff floating around in your browser space right now, waiting for you to click on. So those are leaky memory errors. The biggest cause of memory leaks is detaching DOM elements. So when you have an element that you are interacting with and you attach some different events to it, and then that element, for whatever reason, might come out of the DOM because you repaint, because you redraw, because you just change the order of something, for whatever reason. If you do not remember to detach your event listeners, that will cause these detached DOM elements, and it will cause memory leaks. All of the functions that you'd set up to listen to it are still listening for it, even if the DOM node is no longer visible. And so the only way to really check for this is just play a little video game every couple of weeks. Open up your app, look at the timeline, play around, and watch for the JS memory to tick up and up and up without ever clearing. Which isn't so bad. And you get to tell your boss, like, hey, I'm just going to hang out and play this game for a while. So tonight, we tracked and captured 6 JavaScript outlaws. Script error is the first one we need to solve. It's around obfuscating the real errors that are coming from your browser. Third-party errors. Anytime you're introducing a third-party script from another provider, it introduces this risk that your app can break without your control. Context error, the most common development JavaScript error, change or a misunderstanding of the value of this passing into callbacks. Data error, when your API can change the types or the shape or the structure of the data that you're interacting with. Loading errors, the most common error that I never expected before going into all this, was that when some or a subset of your JavaScript simply fails to load on the page, what state do you leave your application in? And finally, memory errors. When detaching DOM nodes, not cleaning up after yourself, can cause too much memory usage of your browser, slowing down performance, and worse, spinning up the fan on your MacBook so loud that you can't hear and everybody else is looking at you at the coffee shop. All right, and so we did this all with the help of some data from Track.js. So this is the very brief sales pitch part of this. All right, so Track.js shows you a bunch of high-level trends about what kind of stuff is happening in your JavaScript application. We show you high-level things like what are the most prevalent errors, what errors are increasing, what errors are falling off. We group them and tell you how many users are encountering them and what are the most common messages in browsers you need to look into. Then once you've decided about that, you can dig into any errors. And we tell you all kinds of stuff about what is your application doing, what are the network calls being made, and what is the user clicking on that lead the user into a bad state. We call this the telemetry timeline, and we tell you all kinds of interesting context to let you recreate the problems that led to an error. So if your JavaScript town is full of JavaScript outlaws, maybe we can help you out with a new sheriff. So this talk was JavaScript Forensics. I'm Todd H. Gardner. You can get me on Twitter or email me afterwards. And if anybody wants a Track.js sticker, I have a bunch of them. That's it. That's all I got. Any questions?
The Chrome async error stack trace. Have you heard about anybody using it with Angular and the digest loop? Because that could be awesome.
I've used it with Angular and the digest loop, and it doesn't work great.
Okay, kind of what I suspected.
Like Angular is this really annoying thing where the digest loop and how everything is passing through it tends to like hide all of the useful information about stack traces.
Yeah.
It's really terrible.
Don't write that code to start with, and you're fine.
All right, you let me know how that works.
I have a comment, and with the load error.
Yeah.
One thing that can help alleviate that is using a loader like require.js, where you can have multiple locations that you're loading the file from. That's something that we do that has helped.
I totally agree with that. You can also get problems like require.js will itself throw errors if it gets timeouts from it. And so you have to like tune require.js in the right way to like not have that problem and set up like fallbacks. So for a while on Track.js, we used require.js to load stuff, and then when we'd have like a customer sign on from like New Zealand or some just like terrible like internet connection, they would just time out trying to download a particular file, and then require would throw this horrendous stack trace of like all of these problems. Yeah, but if you deploy your scripts to like multiple places and then you create fallbacks, that can totally help. Anything else? Cool. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, Todd. Before everyone gets up and leaves, we have some raffle prizes to give away. Got this really cool Prizatron app that one of our members built. So we're just gonna hook that up. And so if you're new here, the prize that we normally give away is a JetBrains license. We give one of those away every month. We give away a year subscription of Front-End Masters and a month sub to a site called Pluralsight. And so if you do win, I'll just need your email address for the Front-End Masters and the JetBrains license. So
two front-end masters now, don't we?
we can do two, yeah.
Because we got a lot of
We
them queued
have
up.
50 of them for the year.
Yeah.
We also shame you if you RSVP and don't show up, so there's dual uses here.
Yeah.
Chad, are you here?
All right.
Yeah, right here.
So, which
You get
prize-
first choice. You got
Uh,
the JetBrains license, which is IntelliJ, WebStorm, RubyMine, PHP Storm. You can pick one of those products. The year sub to Front-End Masters or a month sub to Pluralsight. Front-End Masters is a front-end framework learning video site.
Yeah, a lot of really good talent done by local guy Mark Urbanski. Brings in a lot of national talent for Angular, Ember, Knockout, all kinds of really good frameworks.
And then Pluralsight's another learning site.
Which also has some front-end master stuff, as well as a ton of other web learning stuff.
Why don't you do the plural,
Pluralsight front. Okay, I have a card for that, so I can give that to you before you go.
So, get at us.
thank you.
You're welcome. How do you pronounce that? I'm not gonna butcher it.
All right. so-
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
You have your choice between JetBrains and Front-End Masters. Cool. Make sure you give your email to one of us before you leave today.
Yeah, and come talk to us. You're one of the ones that couldn't get in, right? Yes. Apologize for that. Come talk to us after the meetup.
Yeah, I'm glad you got in. I'm glad you won. I'm sorry about that.
That's me.
Chris, do we have a shame-free night? First week. That's a new record. That's good. It feels good. Chris, would you like the Front-End Masters license?
I think we'll go with that, yeah.
Okay, good choice. Solid choice.
We also need your email address before you go.
Feel good about it. So good. With that, I think we get another round of applause for Sheriff Todd. That was an awesome talk.
That's it. Everyone have a good night.
If you want to actually do two more, I'll give away 2 6-month Track.js subscriptions.
Surprise giveaway. Let's do it. We got it fired up.
Thank you, Todd.
So I imagine Todd can wire you up with what that will be. Ryan, back there, 4 in a row. We're just killing it tonight.
It's a good turnout.
Mithun. He must have got locked out.
He might have been one of the ones that got.
This thing rigged?
I did not touch the code on this side.
Do you accept, or are you gonna gratuitously give it back to the group?
I'll pass it to the group.
That's very nice. Jordan,
Jordan.
there you are. You guys can get, I imagine Todd can get you all the details for that. Otherwise, if you're Pluralsight, you'll get a card from us tonight. Otherwise, we'll give you email addresses to us, and we will hook you up with that. With that, feel free to hang out, mingle. There were people that were looking to hire, so definitely connect with them.
And we got some Angular stickers up here if you guys want.
Angular stickers, Todd's got Track.js stickers. Get the stickers. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Todd.
Chad, yeah. He said he wanted to send me my resume on Monday.
All right. You want to use
Yeah, are you like a hiring manager?
Thank you.
Yeah. You gotta let me know.
Yeah, the door rock.
Wait, what's that one?
Just change them up every once in a while.
Yeah, I have this one because you gave me my last year.
Yes.
Thank you very much so much.
Hey, let me get you my card.
Yes, sir.
I'll get you my gift license.
Yeah, I didn't,
Thanks for coming out.
We actually do a lot, so if you guys are all interested in the spiel, we're so we have 8 students to us on the 21st, only about 9 of them aren't developers. A couple of DBAs, PMs, with code, and then on the site, whenever We do everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No matter what you say. They do year so yeah, product for a full year. All of
And
it.
if we don't subscribe after.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. The most expensive thing you can because the parents
I do. Yeah, I speak about 10 or 12 conferences a year.
We can say.
So I'm actually going to be at Midwest JS next week, at that conference next week. Probably the last one in Minnesota I'm going to say.
Out here, I have a guy on my team that just created a second version.
No, it's next week.
So,
Midwest JS is next week. I think there's still some beta stuff. It's next Thursday and Friday, and it's at the St. Thomas Opus College in
It's a pretty cool. So it actually have a
JavaScript conference right here.
not just Angular, but
There'll be a bunch of guys from Utah talking about Angular. I think Venkat Subramanian is going to come out and talk about something.
no, not necessarily back
Yeah.
specifically.
Frameworks to use.
Yeah, so we changed.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, that was really good.
Thank you.
It seems like you've done that before.
I have.
Nice job.
I tend, don't think less of me, but like, putting together a talk takes a lot of work. And so,
Yeah.
I might build like hundreds of
I'm Gardner, so,
I
three IT managers.
It's good. I liked it.
I thought it was great because there's a number of us who are actually
Yeah, you can try.
You said it
so
was
we could actually follow along
So then,
and really understood what you were saying.
Super relevant for what you guys are going
if
through.
you guys, so for students, like if you want to, like just get like an education course or just for like a project that you're just working on, we gladly put you in.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, so if any of the students building something and it's like, it's not like commercial, it's just like a thing that they're building, so we have like everybody up with.
Yeah, they're gonna start